Hello, Brubs. We're back with Vampire by Heinz Ewers. I'm not sure what the year was that it was published, but it is a 1934 translation. I guess I should figure out what year it was originally published, so I don't look like a moron. But there we go. Chapter 3, Carnelian. And yet, it was no victory for. Oh no, the format. Carnelians, and yet it was no victory for Lottie Levy. Not that he was playing a Joseph's part in these weeks with her. Far from it. He always did what she wanted and was obedient and docile like a good child. Kiss me, she said, and he kissed her. But he was always tired. He sat at the table with her and forgot to eat. Please eat, she said, and he took a few morsels. Won't you drink your wine? She asked, and then he emptied his glass. She sat on the sofa beside him and held his hand in hers. Now talk to me, she said. Tell me something. He spoke quietly and listlessly, like an unwound watch, but suddenly he stopped. What is it? She asked. But he did not know. He had simply forgotten what he had just been saying. She looked at him intently, studying his face. You were saying something, she whispered. Try to think. He obeyed immediately and tried very hard to think, but he could not remember. I don't know, dear. He hesitated. He could not even think of her name. She noticed it. Don't you know who I am? Now he remembered. Why, yes, of course, Lottie Levy. She shook her head gravely. Or is that Lot? Lot Levy. I'm going to say Lottie Levy. She shook her head gravely. Her face was very serious. But he laughed at her. It is really nothing. I am only a little tired. Now and then. Just lately. Are you sleepy? She said. No, he was not sleepy, not now, and not at those other times when he had felt so tired. Yes, it was strange. He was tired, but he did not feel sleepy. Sometimes it was just the opposite. He would wake up from a long, deep sleep at night or in the daytime and feel more tired and weary than at any other time. What could be the matter then? What could be the matter then? He jumped up and paced up and down the room, walking briskly and stretching his arms. He felt his muscles. No, there was nothing wrong. He was strong and well as ever. He stepped before the mirror and smiled at himself, but the next instant he stumbled. He felt dizzy, but it was only his body that was affected, while his brain remained perfectly clear. Hello, Brubs. Supporting himself on the chair, he looked into the mirror, examining his face, studying his features carefully. He could not find anything strange there, not a thing. His face was just as he had known it for years. Nothing was changed. And yet, oh man, oh shit, even I'm bored. And yet there must be something, but what could it be? He went back to the sofa. You are sick, Lottie said. He shrugged his shoulders. Nonsense, Lottie. No, it isn't nonsense. She heaved a little sigh. Frank Braun, I won't be your mistress tonight, and not tomorrow, and perhaps not for quite some time. You are sick, and so I will be your mother. Now he should crack a joke. He felt a nasty, cynical joke that would deal her love an ugly blow. Now he should say something cruel and stinging, but his voice was soft and it did not sting. He said, and it sounded like a sob, Lottie, I need something. There is something I need badly. Oh, how I am longing for it. For what? She asked. I don't know, he confessed in a listless, desperate voice. I shall find it, my dear boy. Frank Braun sat in his hotel room in Baltimore while the editor of the Herald stood before him, correcting his manuscript. No, no, that won't do, Tews remarked. Here in this place, you should be more concise. Just a short, strong phrase. Why not use the slogan, German loyalty forever? That'll get them. But we have the last 3 times already. But we have that 3 times already, Frank Braun protested. So much the better, the newspaper man cried impatiently. Then maybe they'll take it in. The streets of Baltimore were gaily flagged, bedecked. From every window and every balcony flew the stars and stripes, and enormous flags had been stretched high across the streets, from one house front to the other. A huge throng crowded every inch of space. Why are there no black and white flags for the German day? Frank Braun wondered. I don't know, bros. German Day, Tews laughed. Baltimore is celebrating the anniversary of the Star Spangled Banner. It is 100 years old today. The Flag Day celebration is going to last a whole week, and the German Day is just a small part of it. The parade had now begun and was passing under the windows of Frank Braun's room. There were hundreds of decorated floats with women dressed as Amazons in Roman chariots, with enormous barrels, with houses, cardboard dragons, pianos, and every conceivable piece of tomfoolery. It was like the Cologne Carnival, only tasteless, crude, and unspeakably silly. Why did I ever get mixed up in this? Frank Braun thought. Tews handed the manuscript back to him and gave him an encouraging slap on the shoulder. Now it will be all right. Just read it over a few more times and come along. We haven't much time left. They got into their car and drove through the city out toward the ocean until they came to a spacious amusement park with merry-go-rounds, swings, sideshows, and beer gardens. But this is an amusement park. Am I to speak here? Why, of course, the editor confirmed. Yeah, this is the Bible, you fucking retard. Ever ask me that again. You're stupid. And I hate you. He led Frank Braun through the crowd and up to an orchestra platform in the rear of the field, where the committee sat, 24 fat, perspiring men in frock coats. The singing society, with a few hundred of the lesser dignitaries, occupied the space behind the platform. The new arrivals were given places of honor in the front row, and Frank Braun was introduced to 2 or 3 members of the committee. You are just in time, one of the men said. The show is starting right away. Frank Braun looked at the crowd of men, women, and children that packed the enormous field. People, masses of people, as far as the eye could reach. How many are there, do you think? He asked. 6,000, perhaps? Tews smiled. 6,000? There are at least 40,000 in this crowd. And here he was to speak. Here, before a few hundred people. Yes, all right. Even before 1,000, perhaps 2,000. But before this giant throng, and in the open air to 40,000 people. He reached for his manuscript. He had completely forgotten his speech. Then he smiled. What did it matter? No one would be able to understand a single word anyway. 3 times a gavel pounded on an iron anvil. Pastor Huffner wielded it, the chairman of the German Day. His deep, powerful voice rang out sonorously over the park like great church bells. He spoke only a few words and then said the Lord's Prayer, in which the thousands joined him. One can understand him, Frank Braun thought. He certainly can make himself heard. Then the pastor introduced the first speaker, a congressman from Missouri. Listen carefully, Tews whispered. Here is a real speaker for the crowd. He knows all the tricks. Try to copy his technique. The American held his audience spellbound. He cajoled them with cheap flattery. He appealed to them with demagogic phrases calculated to win over the German voting cattle. And the mainstays at his speech were jokes. Fat, crude, age-old jokes, but the crowd laughed and howled its appreciation. Pacing with quick strides along the edge of the platform and wildly gesticulating with his long arms, he spat out a sentence in a loud, droning voice, but it did not sound like the ringing bells of the pastor's voice. It sounded more like the sharp strokes of a hammer. Then he would pause, a long, drawn-out pause, longer even than his sentence, and again with full lungs, 10, 12 howling words, and another pause. So this is how one does it, Frank Braun thought. He tried to read his manuscript, but he could not make out a single word. It was all blurred over by a huge blotch of black. The black masses of people in the field below, whose nearness almost crushed him with their oppressive weight. Nothing but the thousands of people as far as the eye could see, and far behind them the tall, bare trees of the park and the giant Ferris wheel. I could not do it. Frantically, he looked for an avenue escape. Could he not get up quietly and disappear, hiding himself behind the songsters? But Twos held him by his coat sleeve. Again, the hammer voice spat out a few words, and once again it brought forth hand clapping and cheers from the black herd below. Then there was a pause, until once more the hammer rose and came down with a heavy bang. Another joke, broad, juicy, older than all the others. Everybody knew it, so they all laughed. The American wiped the perspiration from his forehead and waved his handkerchief to the crowd, bowing repeatedly to acknowledge their oh man, their loud applause. Now it's your turn, the newspaper man called. Frank Braun trembled with fear. No, no, he whispered. Tell. Again the gavel pounded on the anvil, the iron anvil, and the pastor's bell like voice rang far out over the field. What was he saying? A guest, a German from the fatherland, a celebrated man, a famous personality, a demigod. A. Of whom was this man talking? Of him? Of Frank Braun? That was the way one might introduce Bismarck, Goethe, Beethoven. Bravo, Two said. That's what I call an introduction. Frank Braun hissed. It is nonsense. Not a single person here even knows my name. Not a single one. Of course not, the editor smiled. Of course they don't know your name. They don't know any name. Why should they? But that's just why they'll swallow anything the pastor says. He is simply marvelous. The pastor walked over to Frank Braun and pulled him up by his hand. And here he is, my German brethren. Here he is, himself. Now Frank Braun stood before the cheering crowd, he alone, facing 40,000 people. He trembled with excitement, blushing in deep embarrassment. He bit his lips, swallowed hard, tried to clear his throat. Pang, pang, the gavel again pounded for attention, and the crowd lapsed into silence. All of a sudden, there was a breathless stillness. 40,000 people were waiting for his words. The color left Frank Braun's face. He turned pale, a ghostly, ashen pale, and stood there as if rooted, unable to move, unable to stir a limb. Why don't you start? The editor whispered. He did not understand. He was to speak? He? What in God's name should he say? Read it off, a voice whispered in his ear. Look at your manuscript. Yes, the manuscript was in his hand. He felt it. His fingers were clasped tightly around it. He raised his hand, unfolded the sheets, and looked at them, but he did it instinctively without knowing what he was about. There was something concerning the terrible times in it, concerning home and the blight of war. Of heroes it told, of death and of dying, and it also exhorted them to give, for their brethren in the fatherland, give. He failed to comprehend what he was reading. He could not grasp the meaning of the words. One word arrested his eye and slowly sank into his consciousness. Weeping, the word was weeping. Start, for God's sake, someone whispered. His arm dropped to his side and he closed his eyes. He crumbled up the paper, threw it away, and deeply inhaling the air into his lungs, he suddenly shouted down at them, Speak to you! I am to speak to you who are laughing in these days. You should weep, you men and women. Weep, weep. Something carried him, lifted him high into the air. It bore him along in rapid flight to the summit of snow-capped mountains, and made him sing out into the black valleys below. He sang of Germany and her magnificent fight, sang of the glory of victory and of a hero's death. He sang of the endless dying and of the plight at home, of the gigantic will that had become action and had turned into a roaring, surging flame. He sang. He felt nothing. He saw nothing. He did not even know that he existed. He only heard a voice. He was that voice. Then suddenly it was over. The voice had stopped and there was a great silence. That surprised him. Just now somebody had been talking here. Had he been talking? He? He shivered. He felt hot. He was on the earth. He was standing on something made of boards. And he had talked just now about something. Yes, he must have talked, that was certain. And now there was a sound like a sob from down in the field, and someone in the rear was crying. What had happened? They were all crying, all of them. 40,000 people were crying. But why? He was still standing there without moving, without stirring a limb, but he felt terribly hot. Now there were shouts from below, clapping, cheers, bow. Twos called over to him. He nodded clumsily and stood helpless in the roaring applause around him. The gentleman of the committee came up to him and shook his hands. The pastor held his right hand in Twos, his left. It was like rockets, the editor said, like rockets shooting up to heaven. The pastor congratulated him. It was very beautiful what you said, my friend, about the tears they should weep. That would turn to pearls and jewels and gold and money, and which they should give today to help those at home. Did I say that? Frank Braun mumbled. Again, the pastor wielded his gavel. Now Frank Braun could understand every word of what he said. He asked them to file past the orchestra platform and give their offering for Germany, no matter how small. Someone handed Frank Braun a coat. Put it on, the man said. You are all wet. Frank Braun felt his clothes. It was true, he was soaking wet. Not only his shirt and underwear, but also his waistcoat and his trousers. That's better than a Turkish bath, the newspaper man laughed. You must have lost at least 4 pounds. Frank Braun thanked the gentleman and put on the coat. A big sheet was brought, and 4 men took hold of it and waited at the foot of the stairs leading to the platform with the pastor and Frank Braun beside them. A band started to play, and the men's chorus sang, 120 male voices. The crowd filed past the musician stand, thousands of people forming an endless procession. May I go now? Frank Braun asked. No, I should say not, Twos cried. You are necessary here. Now comes the most important part of it all. The people dropped money and jewelry into the sheet. Coins, bills, rings, buckles, watches. Some people gave full wallets. Others took the pins out of their neckties, the earrings from their ears. Frank Braun saw a little girl who dropped her ball into the sheet, and servant maid who took a golden buckle off her dress. And everybody wanted to shake hands with him. 10 people, 100, 1,000. At first he returned their clasp, but soon his hand began to ache. Don't return their clasp, Twos advised him. Just hold out your fingers. The sheet was full. Another was brought, and again the coins rained into it, and watches and rings. And still Frank Braun shook hands, blistered, dirty, work-worn hands, and very rarely a clean and soft hand. His hand began to swell, but he still held it out to the people. He thought, would you otherwise have shaken hands with a single one of these people? Not one. But he forced himself not to think of this. Over in Germany, men are lying in the trenches, and all you have to do is shake hands, and with Germans, too, whose hands are as German as yours. But that did not help. The performance disgusted him just the same. Why are you doing it then, he thought. Why do you have to do with it? What do you have to do with it? And still the coins were tinkling into the sheet. This is your money, the pastor smiled. You are bringing in all this money. It will probably come to $100,000, counting the cash alone. Frank Braun was pleased, and yet he could not help thinking, what have I to do with it? Now he offered his left hand until it also began to ache and swell. So he changed right, left, and more people were coming all the time. More. Finally, he closed his eyes. This damn book in the proper place here. He did what Lottie wanted blindly, with no will of his own. He did not live at her house, but he was always there. Sometimes, but not more than once a day, he would go home to change his clothes or get something from his apartment. He spent the days lying on her sofas and chairs, reading or talking to her. And often he just sat perfectly still without doing anything, merely looking into space, not even dreaming. He was her child in the daytime. She nursed him. At night, he was her lover. He lay beside her in her bed and let her kiss him and kissed her. He looked well and his body was strong and powerful. He smiled when he saw their reflection in the tall mirror. Her body was white, very white, with her young. Her body was white, very white, with but a few spots of color. Her red hair and the red buds of her young breasts, and a little red that she had put on here and there, henna on her nails, and a tiny bit of rouge on her lips, nostrils, and earlobes. Her body was tanned. It still showed the effect of the tropical sun. He lifted her up in his arms, and she seemed fragile enough to break in his hands. He was strong, and yet he felt, under your brown skin you are paler, much paler than she is. She is stronger than you are. She has the strength, not you. And at times he felt, I am the woman. She is my husband. She watched him constantly, day and night. Even in her embraces, he felt that he was being watched. Can't you forget, he asked her, now? Forget what? Yourself, me, everything. Yes, I will, she answered, kissing him, when you are well again, Frank Braun. She had him examined by the best physicians in town 4 or 5 times. She made them go over his heart, his lungs, kidneys, everything. The doctors said he was perfectly well and that there was absolutely nothing wrong with him. The tired feeling, this apathy, was only a nervous condition. He should eat well and stop smoking so many cigarettes. Lottie Van Ness shook her head. I shall find it, she insisted. That night he ran through the streets. He had waked in the wide bed beside her, but something was different. For once he wasn't tired. He felt fresh and buoyant. He was conscious of an uneasiness, however, of a feeling of fear, and he knew that he was afraid of the woman by his side. For a moment he sat on the edge of the bed, then hastily he reached for his clothes. He must get away at once. His lips were sticky. He wiped them on his shirt sleeve and noticed blood. Was it from his throat, his lungs? Then he was sick, after all, but he was feeling so fresh and young just now. He went over to the mirror and put on his waistcoat and jacket. He heard a faint sound from the bed behind him, a sobbing sound, but it was so soft, so very soft. She must be crying in her sleep, he thought. He did not go back, and he did not kiss her. He hurried out of the room, took the elevator down, and opened the front door. The night air felt invigorating, and he breathed deeply. He could not think. He could only feel. I have been sick, and now I am suddenly well again. And he knew that all this had something to do with the woman, with Lottie Van Ness. She held him firmly in her grip, and he was withering in her arms. He was her doll, her toy. Had she not always been like this? When he first knew her, she had been a child of 15, but her senses were full grown and yearning for all the dark sins of this world. As long as he could remember, her desires had been those of a wise and very experienced woman of the world, even when she was still a child, innocent and untouched. And now she was Lottie Van Ness, and 30 years old. But her senses were still waiting and yearning, and she had kept her child's soul and her child's breasts. He was her food, and she was sucking him dry, but she did it like a sweet little girl, utterly contented and happy with her piece of candy. He was that candy. He liked that thought. It made him smile. He was a nice candy, to be sure, sweet, and yet a little bitter. Not like ordinary candy, a real treat for a spoiled little girl. And more than that, he was a magic candy, the kind he had always wished for as a boy. A candy you could suck and lick for hours while it got smaller and smaller, and that suddenly becomes its original size again. He was that kind of candy. He was almost all gone, vanished in the kisses of this woman, and now he had become whole again and had jumped out of Lottakin's little mouth. He was again deeply breathing the night air, exulting in his newly won freedom as he burned down the streets and across Broadway. All right. I guess we're gonna have a little intermission there. He got up early the next morning, had his bath, and put on his kimono. Then he rang for tea. While he was waiting, he took up the receiver and called her. I am well, Lottie, he cried. I am well again. I know it, she answered. That made him angry. How could she know? You, clever? Why don't you tell me what you know? He heard her say, last night, but then she stopped. Last night? I ran away. Yes, I ran away from you. Is that what made you think? Slowly, she answered. No, not that. I knew it before. Oh, never mind. Come, Lottie, tell me, he insisted. No, no, this is none of your business. I am sorry, but I learnt that from you. All right, never mind, he called, but you must tell me just the same. Come over, Lottie. We will go for a drive up the Hudson. I can't come, she sobbed. I am sick, and I don't want you to come see me. Not today, not this week. Wait till I call you. Lottie, he cried. Lottie. There was no answer. His old manservant brought the tea and the morning papers and put them down silently, mechanically, idiotically. Why don't you ask where I have been? Frank Braun thought. Why don't you ask if I am now going to sleep home again? But the old servant did not ask. He walked silently through the room and took up his duster. Get out of here, Frank Braun cried impatiently. Then he had his fruit, his tea and toast, read the papers, and smoked his first cigarette. There was a knock, and the servant announced Mr. Tews. Have him come in, Frank Braun ordered. He was glad to see a visitor, somebody he could talk to. Doctor, the newspaper man called from the door. Everything is settled. Here is your itinerary. You are starting in 3 days. We will begin up north in New England. Your first stop in Boston. Then we take the Middle West, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, 28 cities altogether. That will be enough for the first trip. I am starting ahead of you today to make all the arrangements. I believe that everything has been prepared as carefully as possible, but I must admit, Doctor, we were quite afraid you would desert us at the last moment. Desert you? Frank Braun laughed. I did not promise anything, did I? You didn't, Doctor. Who did then? Mrs. Van Ness, the editor replied in a businesslike tone. Frank Braun was furious. Mrs. Van Ness? Has she promised your committee that I would go? And she probably also hinted that I was not very dependable and that I might back out of it at the last minute. Yes, we heard that you were sick. From whom, please? Frank Braun was trying to control his anger. From Mrs. Van Ness. Frank Braun drummed with his fingers on the table. Mrs. Van Ness, and the lady presumably told you that I was well now. Tews imitated his tone. Yes, the lady told us that. The lady, Mrs. Van Ness, just telephoned to let me know that everything was all right and that you would go on the tour. Frank Braun rose from his chair and faced the editor. Just a minute, he cried. Whether I am making speeches for your committee or not, whether I am going on this damn trip or not, what concern is this of Mrs. Van Ness? And if I and this lady, yes, what the devil has this to do with you and your committee? The editor laughed. Come now, Doctor, don't be a child. Look here, since the beginning of the war, about 30 committees have been formed for all kinds of patriotic purposes, and if the war lasts another year, we will have 300. And the Allies, believe me, have 3 times as many. Do you think that all these committees can work just for the fun of it? They need backing, money, our backing, or at least 3/4 of it is Mrs. Van Ness. And if the interest of our committee in your speech making happens to coincide with the interest that this lady takes in you personally, so much the better for us. It only makes her checks bigger. Do you understand now? Understand? Why, of course, Frank Braun understood the gentleman of the committee. He knew the cost of advertising in this country. He knew that all the associations and committees were continually going around rattling their cups. Money, money! One has to drop many thousands into the cup to take in the millions, the dream millions that were to help Germany. But she, Lottie Levy, what did she have to do with it? It was all right for her to give a little money, write checks. Yes, why not? She was so rich she could afford it. And if she gave thousands as he would give pennies, it was still all right and hardly worth mentioning. But this was different. She had suggested him to the committee, and she had sent twos after him, and the committee, probably on her advice, had sent him to Baltimore. They had sent him there to try him out. Yes, that must have been the reason. And now they were sending him on this speaking tour on her money, or rather, she was sending him through the committee. Not that they were paying him for it, but they provided him with the opportunity to speak and even forced him into it. But why? What did she get out of it? She, Lottie Levy. He could not understand it. Brushing back his hair, he turned to twos with a resolute gesture. I am going, in spite of it. The editor whispered, in spite of it. What do you mean? In spite of what? Of course you are going. Frank Braun spoke in Boston and Buffalo and Rochester and Albany. He spoke in Columbus and Milwaukee. In fact, he spoke every day and sometimes twice a day. He addressed people in assembly halls, in theaters, and fire halls, and twice he even spoke from the pulpit. The public crowded to his lectures, not because they had any idea who he was, but because Twos had seen to it that his lectures were well advertised. Frank Braun had to see newspaper men every day and shake hands constantly. He always said the same things in the morning to the reporters, at night to the public, and afterwards to the notable when twos brought around for him, whom twos brought around for him to meet. Every day was the same. He boarded the train, undressed, and went to sleep. In the morning, he arrived at a hotel that looked exactly like the one he had been to the day before, had an identical room, took his bath in the same kind of tub, and found always the same black Bible on his night table. In the morning, he read the papers. Invariably, they had his pictures with the same phrases about him. It was all like a machine, but suddenly a little cog stopped working somewhere within him. He hardly noticed it, but Twos, who was watching him constantly, detected it at once. He led Frank Braun away from the stage that night as soon as the applause had died down, and made him go to bed at once without letting him talk to anyone. From then on, Twos himself saw the reporters and talked to the crowd that came to see Frank Braun after his lectures in the dressing room. He also had champagne brought for Frank Braun every evening, just before he had to go on. What is wrong? Frank Braun wondered. You must take care of yourself. You are getting tired again. You are sick, and I am responsible for you. Responsible to whom? Frank Braun laughed. To your committee? They don't give a damn whether I am tired or not. No, of course not. But I have an extra job. Pays me $20 a day. An extra job? Frank Braun asked. You? What is it? And who gave you the job? It is perfectly all right, Twos told him calmly. I am to look after you, and Mrs. Van Ness is paying for it. That's all. Again, Frank Braun was ready to explode, but Twos hushed him quickly. Not now, he said calmly. Someone at the door. It's the doctor. Frank Braun shouted, Throw him out. I don't want to see a doctor. Do you hear me? The newspaper man shrugged his shoulders. All right, I will send him away. I have done my duty. Frank Braun spoke badly that night. He said exactly the same thing he had said every night. His voice rose and fell as usual. He came to the same pauses, and everything went just as always. But something was lacking. The something that had gripped the crowds and made them sit up and take notice. As he stood on the stage, he felt as if there were an endless desert between him and the crowd, as if the footlights had become a high wall separating him from them. He could not get himself across tonight. He stood on the stage and spoke, but he felt alone and indifferent and very tired. No more blood, the editor said. He wired that same night and canceled the remaining 2 or 3 lectures. But tomorrow you must do it just once more, Doctor. Pull yourself together, please. He brought Frank Braun to his train, saw that his bed was comfortable, and wished him a good rest. Frank Braun fell sound asleep as soon as he was in bed and did not wake until daylight, just as the train was pulling into Philadelphia. But he was feeling more tired than ever. This time it was to be a debate in the great auditorium of the Academy of Music. The house was crowded to the last inch of space, and people were standing in lines so far out into the street. Twos took him in by the stage entrance and led him to his dressing room, pressing a slip of paper into his hand. Here, read this. It will remind you of what this is all about today. You seem to have completely forgotten. Frank Braun looked at the slip. He had not forgotten. He had remembered to read it all in the manuscript and then again in the galley proofs. There was his picture and his name and the usual phrases about his alleged fame, and on the other side was the picture of a beautiful woman, Mrs. Maud Livingstone, the most famous actress in the world. The program called her the intimate friend and best interpreter of G.B. Shaw. The Yes, he remembered it perfectly. She would speak for England and he for Germany. First she, then he, and then she again. It was to be a jousting match, a cockfight. Twos took a champagne bottle from the cooler and poured out a glass for Frank Braun. Drink, doctor, overcome your apathy just for tonight. Frank Braun poured the champagne down like water, but it left him just as tired and indifferent as before. He looked coldly at Twos, who was shifting nervously from one foot to the other as he tried to talk against the blank wall of Braun's indifference. What he said fell on empty ears, as if he were talking to a wax figure. There are 5,000 people here tonight, the best society of the Quaker City. 3/4 of them are pro-English. Have another drink, and your opponent tonight is a woman, mind you, a lady, don't forget that. That isn't as easy as it was against Chesterton in Cleveland or against Hillis in Cincinnati. You are fighting against a woman in America. You can't let me down tonight, Doctor. Everybody told me I was a fool to accept this challenge for you. And yes, and yet I did. Have another. I had such confidence in you. You must win tonight, Doctor. You must. And what if she is a woman? Have just one more. 9 chances out of 10 are against you, but damn it, you can do it if you want to, and you must do it. Frank Braun merely nodded. He was bored. He rose from his chair, went to the mirror to adjust his tie, and said calmly, Perhaps I will do it. Perhaps I won't. Probably I won't. For God's sake, the editor began again. Never mind, Frank Braun interrupted him. I know myself now, and I realize that it is not I that does the speaking. It is something within me. And if that thing doesn't do it, if what doesn't do it, Twos cried in despair. What is it that does the talking within you? My dear man, Frank Braun smiled, I don't know that any more than you do. He turned and left the room. Backstage, he saw an elderly gentleman with a lady in evening dress. The lady was tall and heavy, with broad hips and mighty breasts. Is that Miss Livingstone? He asked Twos, who had followed him. This? No, of course not. This is Madame Lockman. Don't you know her? Yes, he knew her. Eva Lockman, the greatest singer of 2 continents. He had heard her in the Dresden Opera in Berlin and New York. Twos introduced them, and they shook hands. I'm giving a concert here tomorrow, the diva said, but I came one day earlier, especially to hear your debate. You have courage, Doctor, to speak against a woman in this country. She looked at him with her big, dark eyes. Why is there no fire in them, he thought. Good luck, she wished him. I will kiss my rabbit's foot for you. A shrill bell summoned them to the stage. Come, the newspaper man urged. Come up on the stage. Aren't you going in, Madame Lockman? Couldn't get a seat. She smiled even. This motherfucker. Couldn't get a seat, she smiled. Even when I sing it is hardly so crowded. We are glad to have a few chairs back here in the wings. Oh, my eye's gonna itch. The journalist pulled Frank Braun up onto the great stage. The curtain had not yet gone up. There were 12 rows of people sitting in a semicircle in the rear of the stage, and in front, before the footlights, were three small tables and 3 chairs. That gentleman there is the umpire, Tews explained, the best man in the city, a Scotchman, judge of the Supreme Court. Cost us $100. He introduced Frank Braun to him. From the other side of the stage came the actress with her manager. The 2 speakers were introduced to each other and shook hands. The Scotchman took up the program and read aloud, Will the victory of the Central Powers or that of the Allies bring more progress to the world, and especially to America? The Englishwoman laughed. One thing is certain, nothing on earth will ever bring progress to this world. Frank Braun looked up. She is clever, he thought. He gave her a searching glance, studying her face, and he could feel her eyes measuring him critically. She looked very distinguished in her lavender dress. Her gray eyes were sharp and clever. She had regular features and a noble profile. She wore no makeup and no wig. Her fair, curly hair was combed back in a simple knot. It was a little gray at the temples. This was no ordinary actress. This was a great woman. She is... I can't say it. She is shrewd, Tews whispered. She knows her public. Another signal, and the curtain rose. The Scotch judge introduced the speakers with a few witty remarks. He did not know anything about them except what he had read in the program, but the audience did not know any more. He chatted amiably, and people clapped and enjoyed it. He spoke of a murderous Europe where people were killing one another, while in the magnificent civilized country opponents fought each other with weapons of the brain. He told them a long story about the fame of the 2 speakers and about his own, and closed with the Star-Spangled Banner. Now the proper atmosphere pervaded the hall. He gave the floor to the woman. She spoke modestly and simply. In the beginning, she made some resounding remarks about this magnificent country, and then told a clever joke. She showed her marvelous teeth and enunciated slowly and clearly, emphasizing every word. She spoke simply and winningly. Yes, she knows the crowd, Frank Braun thought. She can make them follow her. She is holding them firmly in that small, nervous hand of hers. He would not hold them today, not he. He looked at the audience. They listened breathlessly. Every eye was fixed on this supple woman. No one looked at him. He rose from his chair quietly and softly, and with 2 long steps he stood in the first wing. He smiled with pleasure because he was so sure that no one had noticed. No one, with the exception Tews. Tews had followed him. Where are you going? He demanded. Running away to hide yourself? This is cowardly. Yes, I don't care. Tews took hold of Frank Braun's coat sleeve and talked to him, begged him, scolded him. The words came like hail. Cowardice, betrayal, worse than desertion. He should be ashamed of himself. Rotten cowardice. Frank Braun listened patiently, but did not answer. The editor worked himself up into a great pitch of excitement, but finally he stopped when he realized that it was no use. All right, he said finally, go if you want to. It will be better for me anyway. Why for you? Tews showed him a wire. Here, read this. This is in answer to my report of this morning. Frank Braun read, canceled tonight also. Bring him back at once. Van Ness. The journalist said I did not cancel it in spite of this wire for the sake of our cause. It would have cost me my job, and I can use the money. So you see why it is better for me if you do not speak tonight. Frank Braun crumpled up the telegram. She shall not have her way, he hissed. I shall speak. Then he turned to Twos. You just go on and don't worry. I will be on the stage in time. He went backstage and hurried to his dressing room. He drank the rest of the champagne, went back into the wings, and paced nervously up and down. He made a supreme effort, gritting his teeth, clasping his hands, passing his fingers across his face. I must do it. I must, he whispered, but he could not force it. He remained empty, quite empty. He felt inside as if a simoon. What the hell is a simoon? Had struck him, leaving everything parched and dry, and nowhere a blade of green grass. He was feverish. He trembled. He felt tears mount in his eyes. His knees were giving way. He stumbled and supported himself on a backdrop. A noise startled him. They were applauding out in front, clapping and cheering. Desperate, hopeless, he stared into space with vacant eyes like someone going to be hanged. Something drew him forward. He stumbled a step or two and looked up into the dark eyes of the diva. What is the matter with you? She asked. He groaned. I don't know. Then suddenly, abruptly, may I kiss you? He did not wait for her answer, but grasped her and pulled her to his body like a wild animal. Forcing down her arms, he pressed his chest against her mighty breasts. Then he gripped her head and kissed her. He felt how her lips were opening. He closed his eyes and drank this mad kiss. A noise behind him, clapping and cheering. He tore himself loose and hurried over to his side behind the stage. Again he heard the bell of the umpire, felt the sudden silence of the crowd, and heard the words of the judge who was giving him the floor. Now he was back in front. Now he stepped out on the stage and went over to his table, but the crowd did not want him. A few began clapping again, and soon they all joined in. They were acclaiming again and again the woman. Frank Braun stood before his table, smiling nervously, trembling, brushing back his hair and waiting. Once more the umpire rose from his chair and asked for silence. Again the crowd obeyed, but they hissed and shouted as soon as Frank Braun opened his mouth, and then they began again to clap for the woman. He understood that they did not want to hear him, but he only smiled. Finally, Miss Livingstone waved her hand and silenced them. She begged them on his behalf. She said that it was unjust and that they should be fair in this country of liberty and justice. They should let him speak. The audience frantically cheered her. How clever she is, he thought, and how sure of her victory. Yeah. Now the crowd was silent, and he could begin. He spoke easily, more so than ever before. He did not make jokes nor flattering remarks about this magnificent country. He spoke skillfully and fluently, fully conscious of every word and its effect. He spoke just as well as she, and he was even more sure of himself, because he felt that it would come, perhaps now or in the next sentence, or in the sentence after that, but it would come. The thing that she did not have, the thing that he had lost today and that he had found again in the kiss of a great woman. The thing that tamed the thousand-headed beast down in the auditorium until it became docile as a lamb, eating out of his hands and licking its master's whip. The thing that gave him power with which to beat his thought into the beast's brain, and his belief of the moment into the beast's chest. Now he took up a word, two or three, a sentence, a subtle, sharp, pointed sentence, and cracked it over their heads like a whip, and again, and the iron gates were thrown wide open as he beat against them with his magic whip. The beast of the 5,000 heads had only one great soul, after all, and this soul was high and lofty as a dome, and he stepped into it through the iron gates that flew open before him. Intoxicated by the whir of his whip, mesmerized by the flaming torch that he carried, he threw his torch into the depth of the dome, and a mighty flame rose up and surged heavenward. Now everything was blurred. His eyes alone drank in this ocean of flaming red. Blood, he thought, blood! He walked through a sea of flame, shouting, smiling like a prophet. That remained with him, that alone. He did not hear his own words, nor the tumult of the crowd when he ended. He did not hear the remarks of the judge, nor the nervous closing sentences of the Englishwoman, nor the cheering and stamping at the close. The applause that was for him alone and for his cause. He saw only the flames and blood. Blood! He was standing in the wings with the diva. Are you staying at the Ritz too? She asked. He nodded. You will have supper with me, won't you? She continued, and he reached for her hand and kissed it. Yes, he said, I will. He held her glance, and now her eyes were burning warmly. They were burning softly and secretively, too. They made him think of a fireplace. He desired her just as he had felt that she desired him, and his eyes told her so. Hers answered, Tonight. She took his arm and pressed it silently. Then she smiled. I drank a glass of Bordeaux before I go on. I drink a glass of Bordeaux before I go on. Some people must have chartreuse or beer or something else. But you, I only hope you will always find such a good-natured lamb as I am. The old gentleman laughed in twos, and the others joined him. Twos joked. He had champagne, a whole bottle of it, but that does not seem to do him a bit of good. Frank Braun bowed. Beautiful lady, isn't your kiss better than champagne? She pursed her lips. Don't, please. That isn't your line. She pulled him aside into the wings and whispered, Do you think I don't know what you wanted? Here. She showed him her handkerchief. It was red with bloodstains. He stared at it. That? Was that what he wanted? You ruined my lips, she smiled, but I will pay you back tonight. I'm guessing he's drinking her blood. That's the end of chapter 3. Funny thing is, it's been so long since I read chapter 2, I don't really remember it, so, oh well.